She's just the ammo runner. Somebody get her away from that rifle. Nobody moved, because Emily Parker was already behind the scope. Reeves was down, bleeding, gone from the fight. The enemy commander was directing the slaughter from 800 meters up the ridge, and every trained operator on that team was pinned, outgunned, and running out of time. Bullets tore the dirt 6 inches from her knee. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. 11 months they had walked past her. 11 months she had carried their ammunition and said nothing. Now she was carrying something else entirely, and she only needed one shot. Subscribe right now and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The first thing you need to understand about Emily Parker is that she was very good at disappearing. Not the kind of disappearing that draws attention. Not the dramatic vanishing act of someone who wants to be found. Emily Parker disappeared the way furniture disappears in a room you've lived in for years, so present, so constant, so utterly woven into the fabric of daily life that the eye stops registering it altogether. She was 27 years old. She stood 5'6" in her boots. She wore her dark hair pulled back so tightly that the knot at the back of her head looked almost architectural, precise and immovable, the way everything about Emily Parker tended to look. Her eyes were a shade of brown that caught light differently depending on the hour. Almost amber in the Afghan afternoon sun, almost black in the pre-dawn briefings when the team gathered before a mission. Nobody ever commented on her eyes. Nobody really commented on Emily at all, which was, if you understood her history, almost perfectly intentional. She had arrived at the forward operating base 11 months ago on a Tuesday. Nobody remembered the exact date later. Nobody remembered the transport she came in on, the bag she dropped by the supply room door, or the handshake she exchanged with Staff Sergeant Dale Whitmore, the logistics coordinator who processed her paperwork and showed her to her quarters with all the enthusiasm of a man signing for a package he didn't order. "You'll be on the ammo rotation," Whitmore had told her, not looking up from his clipboard. "Report to the armory at 0500. Rodriguez will walk you through the inventory system. Don't touch anything in the third cage until you've been cleared." Questions? "No," Emily said. Whitmore finally looked up. He studied her for approximately 2 seconds, long enough to register that she was female, young, and standing with a straightness that most recruits lost somewhere between basic training and their first real deployment, and then he looked back down at his clipboard. "Good," he said. "Welcome to the team." That was the beginning, and in many ways the end of Emily Parker's formal introduction to the Navy SEAL team. She would spend the next 11 months serving, protecting, and ultimately saving. She was given the nickname Runner sometime in the 3rd week, though she could never pinpoint exactly who had started it. It wasn't meant to be cruel. She understood that. The SEALs didn't name people cruelly. They named people accurately, or at least according to what they could see, and what they could see was a woman who moved ammunition from one place to another with impressive efficiency and zero complaint. She ran the ammo. She was Runner. It was that simple in a world where simplicity was a survival mechanism. The armory became Emily's universe, and she learned it the way she learned everything, completely, systematically, and with a depth that would have surprised anyone who bothered to look closely, which almost no one did. She memorized inventory counts with the precision of someone who understood what it meant when numbers were wrong. She tracked expiration dates on propellant charges, flagged environmental damage on optics before it became mission critical. And it well with what Rodriguez, a heavy-set man from Tucson, who chewed the same brand of sunflower seeds every single day, called an uncanny feel for equipment. "You got good hands, Parker," Rodriguez told her one afternoon, watching her break down and inspect a rifle that one of the SEALs had returned after a training exercise. "Like you've done this 1,000 times. "Just paying attention," Emily said. "Yeah, well," Rodriguez popped a handful of seeds into his mouth, chewed thoughtfully. "Most people don't pay that much attention to things that aren't supposed to matter." Emily didn't answer. She set the bolt carrier back into the receiver with a soft, definitive click and began the reassembly with steady hands and eyes that didn't waver. Rodriguez watched her for another moment, then went back to his own work. He never asked what she meant. She never offered more. That was the pattern of Emily Parker's existence at the Phobie, a series of almost conversations, almost connections moments where someone came close to seeing her and then drifted back to seeing only what they expected to see: the ammo runner doing her job, staying in her lane, not getting in the way. She was fine with this, Or she told herself she was fine with this, which is a different thing entirely, though the difference can be hard to feel from the inside. The rifle that would eventually change everything belonged to Chief Petty Officer Michael Reeves, and Emily had been maintaining it for 9 of the 11 months she'd been at the FOB. Michael Reeves was exactly the kind of man that war produces in small numbers and Hollywood produces in large ones, tall, economical in movement, with a quality of stillness about him that felt less like patience and more like a coiled thing waiting to release. He had been operating at the highest levels of his craft for 11 years. He had more confirmed long-range engagements than anyone on the team was cleared to discuss. He wore his experience quietly, the way men who have genuinely done things tend to wear it, which is nothing like the way men who want credit for things tend to wear it. How was respected? More than respected, he was trusted with people's lives, the way surgeons are trusted, the way pilots are trusted, in that absolute practical no room for sentiment way that bypasses admiration and lands somewhere closer to dependency. And his rifle was a work of relationship. Emily understood this the first time she handled it, which was roughly 3 weeks into her rotation when Reeves dropped it at the armory window with a look that communicated precisely nothing and said, "Scope's drifting. Somebody got into it." Rodriguez was out sick that day. Emily was alone at the window. She took the rifle. She examined the scope mounting. She adjusted the torque on the base screws with a measured, deliberate hand, checked the reticle alignment, dry fired 3 times to test the trigger brake, and set it back on the counter. "It'll hold now," she said. The scope rings had worked loose, heat and vibration. "It happens with this model if the initial torque isn't high enough." Reeves stared at her for a moment. "How high did you take it?" 65 inch-pounds on the base, 40 on the rings. Standard for this mount system at elevation. You should check it again after the next high-temp exposure. Another silence. "You know this rifle," Reeves said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a compliment either. It was an observation delivered in the flat diagnostic tone of someone filing information away for potential future use. "I know most of the rifles," Emily said. Reeves picked it up, checked the scope himself, dry-fired twice and nodded. "Good work," he said. He walked away. That was as close as they came to a real conversation for the next 8 months. But he kept bringing her the rifle, not Rodriguez, not anyone else, her. And every time she handled it, cleaned it, inspected it, adjusted it, prepared the ammunition for it with the particular care she gave to everything that mattered. She felt something she didn't quite have a name for. Something between grief and muscle memory. Something that lived in her hands before it lived in her mind. Her father's voice lived in those hands. Thomas Parker had been, depending on who you asked, either the best long-range shooter the Army Special Forces had ever produced or the best shooting instructor the Army Special Forces had ever produced, the distinction being somewhat academic since he was arguably both simultaneously. He was the kind of man who made difficult things look effortless, not because he was gifted, though he was, but because he had spent so much of his life in disciplined practice that the effort had become invisible, absorbed into reflex and intuition, and a deep bodily understanding of physics that he couldn't have explained in formal terms, but could demonstrate at 800 meters in a crosswind. He had started teaching Emily to shoot when she was 9 years old, not because he wanted her to be a soldier, not because he wanted her to be anything in particular, which was itself a kind of gift he never quite understood he was giving. He taught her because it was what he knew, and because she was curious, and because there was something in the way she looked at his rifle from the time she was small enough that it was nearly as long as she was tall that told him she wasn't afraid of it. Most people are afraid of rifles and don't know it. Thomas Parker had explained to her once, sitting at the workbench in their garage in the late autumn evening, both of them cleaning his rifle the way some families might have cooked dinner together or watched television. The fear comes out sideways, as aggression, as carelessness, as the need to prove something. "But you're not afraid of it," he told her. He wasn't being complimentary. He was being precise, which means you can learn to carry it right. "What does carrying it right mean?" Emily had asked. She was 12. She was cleaning the bolt with a precision cloth, doing it the way he'd shown her, slowly. "It means understanding that the rifle doesn't have an opinion," Thomas said. "It will do exactly what you tell it to do, exactly as well as your preparation allows it to do it. Nothing more, nothing less. The responsibility for what happens is entirely yours. That's what most people can't hold, the weight of that." Emily had thought about this for a long time in the way that children sometimes absorb things they don't fully understand yet, but somehow know are important. And you can hold it, she asked. Thomas Parker was quiet for a moment. I learned to, he said finally. It took a long time. She didn't ask what it had taken the time to learn the ability to shoot or the ability to carry the weight of it. She came to understand much later that they were the same thing. By the time Emily was 16, she could group 5 shots inside 3 inches at 500 meters under field conditions. By the time she was 18, she had surpassed the informal benchmarks her father used to evaluate his best students, a fact he noted without fanfare, and with a look on his face that she had spent the years since trying to fully interpret pride. Certainly, but something else underneath it, something that might have been concern or recognition, or the complicated feeling of watching your own ability in someone else's body and not knowing whether to celebrate or worry. Thomas Parker died on a Wednesday in October when Emily was 22. Heart attack fast and absolute, the kind that doesn't negotiate. He was 61 years old. He was in good shape. It didn't matter. Emily took 2 weeks of leave and then went back to work at the training facility where she'd been employed as a small arms instructor. After deciding against the sniper track she'd been quietly but repeatedly encouraged to pursue. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She completed her work with the same precision she always brought to it. She ate at regular intervals. She slept approximately 6 hours a night. Inside, she felt like a house after the walls have been removed, structurally intact in some technical sense, open to every kind of weather. She had told herself she was done with the rifle, not because she was afraid of it, because the rifle was her father and her father was gone, and she couldn't figure out how to be the person who held that weapon without also holding all the grief of what it meant to have learned it from him, and she was not at all certain she could carry that weight while also carrying everything else life was asking her to carry. So she became a logistics specialist. She was excellent at it. She applied to the military, passed every requirement with the kind of scores that generate quiet sideways looks from evaluators who don't quite know what to do with numbers that high from a candidate who seems determined not to distinguish herself, and found herself eventually at the forward operating base in the mountains of Afghanistan, handing ammunition to Navy SEALs who called her runner and saw her on their clearest days as a competent, reliable, and visible asset. She had been trying in some sense to put the rifle down. She was beginning to understand that some things can't be set down. They can only be carried differently. The team she worked with operated the way elite units operate, with a fluency born from thousands of hours of shared experience, a language made of shorthand and half sentences and looks that conveyed entire conversations. To an outsider, they might have seemed clannish, even cold. To Emily, who observed everything and attached herself to nothing, they were simply a closed system operating according to rules she had no mechanism to enter through. She didn't try, she did her job. She maintained Reeves's rifle with a care that was, if she was being entirely honest with herself, something close to love, or the closest she could come to it with what had been left to her after the grief had done its work. Every time she cleaned it, she heard her father's voice. Every time she checked the zero, she felt his hands guiding hers. Every time she prepared the ammunition with the measured, methodical attention he had drilled into her, inspecting each round, checking seating depth, sorting by weight for consistency, she was, in some way she couldn't articulate, still in the garage on those autumn evenings. Sergeant First Class Dominic Hayes was the first person on the team who ever said anything to Emily that felt like genuine curiosity rather than operational courtesy. This happened in the 7th month, which meant it had taken approximately 200 days for someone to wonder about her as a person rather than a function. Hayes was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been lived in hard and emerged better for it. Not handsome in any conventional sense, but arresting memorable, the face of someone whose interior experience had found its way to the surface over years of sustained pressure. He was the team's senior enlisted advisor, which in practical terms meant he was the person everyone came to when they didn't know who else to come to. He sat down next to Emily in the mess hall on a Tuesday evening when the rest of the team was occupied with their own conversations, set his tray down with the deliberateness of a man who had made a decision, and said without preamble, "You went to the shooting range last night." Emily looked up from her food. "How do you know that? Martinez saw you, said you were there for 2 hours." "The range is available after 1800, Emily said. "I was within operating parameters." "I'm not saying you broke a rule." Hayes picked up his fork. I'm asking why. There was a pause. I like to stay current, Emily said carefully. Hayes studied her with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who has spent years reading people in high-stakes situations and developed a very good eye for the difference between truth and the version of truth people choose to offer. Current, he said, on fundamentals, maintenance of skill sets relevant to Parker. She stopped. What are you doing here? Hayes asked. His voice was not unkind. It was direct in the way that honest concern is direct, a straight line to the center of a question. Emily set down her fork. Serving my country, she said. Come on. A long silence opened between them, the kind that has texture that presses. My father was Army Special Forces, Emily said finally. Long-range precision. He was the best I ever saw. He taught me everything. She paused. He died 4 years ago. Hayes was quiet. And you put the rifle down, he said. It wasn't a question. Emily looked at her tray. I thought I did. Hayes ate in silence for a moment. How long were you going at the range last night? He asked. 2 hours, like you said. Hit anything? Something in Emily's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. Everything, she said. Hayes nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else about it. He finished his food, picked up his tray, and paused for just a moment before he left. Your father taught you well, he said quietly. Whatever he taught you to carry, Parker, don't drop it. He walked away. Emily sat alone at the table for a long time after that, her food untouched, her hands flat on the surface in front of her, absolutely still. 2 weeks after that conversation with Hayes, Reeves brought her his rifle for what had become their standing monthly inspection. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun was starting its descent behind the ridgeline, turning the light that amber color that made everything look both beautiful and ancient. Emily had the armory to herself. Rodriguez had taken a jeep into the forward resupply point. Reeves set the case on the counter and unlatched it. Oh, he watched her open, watched her hands go through the familiar sequence receiver barrel, bolt group, optic bipod. Each component examined with the practiced certainty of someone who has done this long enough that the hands know things the eyes don't yet see. Zero's good, Emily said. Somebody's been keeping it consistent. I've been doing the field maintenance myself, Reeves said. You've been doing it right. She paused on the bolt carrier, examining the firing pin channel. You've got some carbon buildup at the base. Not critical yet. Give me 20 minutes. Reeves leaned against the counter. He didn't leave, which was unusual. Normally, he dropped the rifle and went back to whatever came next. Emily began the cleaning process without acknowledging that he was still there. She worked with the kind of focused quiet that fills a room without taking it over. After several minutes, Reeves said, You fire long range, don't you? Emily didn't look up. Who told you? Told you. Hayes and Martinez. And Whitmore actually, who apparently saw you at the range about 3 months ago and wondered who had authorized a logistics specialist to be using sniper caliber equipment. He paused. I told him I'd look into it. Emily set down the cleaning rod. She looked up at him. And, she said, Reeves held her gaze. I looked into it, he said. You don't need my authorization to use the range. A beat. But I want to understand, he said, what I'm looking at. Emily was very still. What do you mean, she asked. Reeves picked up one of the cleaned components from the mat, examined it, set it back down. I've let you maintain this rifle for 9 months, he said. You handle it like someone who has a relationship with it. Not just technically, something else. He looked at her directly. What's your background, Parker? The silence stretched. Emily picked up the cleaning rod again. She worked for another 3 seconds. Then she said, My father was Thomas Parker, Army Special Forces. He spent 22 years as a precision shooter and a shooting instructor. He trained some of the best long-range operators this country ever produced. Something moved across Reeves's face. Thomas Parker, he said carefully. You know the name, Emily said. I know the name, Reeves confirmed. His voice had shifted just slightly into a register that Emily hadn't heard from him before. He's practically a legend in certain circles. He was my father, Emily said. He taught me to shoot from the time I was 9 years old. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had weight and recognition in it, the quality of a room where something important has just been spoken aloud for the first time. Why are you running ammunition? Reeves asked. Emily fit the bolt carrier back into the receiver. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. Because when he died, she said, I thought putting the rifle down was the only way to put the grief down. I was wrong. But by the time I figured that out, I was here. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. The range is available after 1800, he said finally. I know, Emily said. I'll be there at 1900 Thursday, Reeves said, if you want someone to shoot with. Emily looked up at him. He was not quite smiling, but the quality of his stillness had changed. There was something in it now, not softness exactly, but the opening of a door that had been closed. Okay, Emily said. They shot together that Thursday evening. Reeves didn't say much. He didn't need to. He watched her work, watched her settle into the position, watched her read the conditions, watched her breathing and her trigger discipline, and the way she followed through after the shot, and he understood within the first 3 rounds that he was watching something real. Not trained, inherited, the kind of skill that comes from being taught by someone who carries their own skill in their body and passes it not just through instruction, but through proximity, through years of shared practice, through the invisible transfer of understanding that happens between a teacher and a student who both love the same thing. She put 3 rounds inside 2 inches at 600 meters in an 11-knot crosswind. Reeves lowered his own rifle and looked at her for a long moment. Your father, he said quietly, knew exactly what he was doing. Emily chambered the next round. He always did, she said. They didn't talk about it at the base. Emily went back to her rotation. She checked equipment. She prepared ammunition. She was runner, and runner was what the team needed her to be, and she was good at it, and she told herself this was enough. But something had shifted. Inside the armory, when she handled Reeves's rifle, she heard her father's voice differently now. Not as grief, as instruction, as if he had been speaking to her all along and she was only just now quiet enough to hear him clearly. She didn't know yet what it would cost to become that quiet. She didn't know what was coming down out of the mountains. She didn't know that in exactly 17 days the enemy would move first and the team would be trapped and the sniper would fall, and every hour she had spent in grief and in secret practice and in the long patient work of carrying something she thought she'd put down would arrive at the only moment that had ever actually mattered. She didn't know any of that yet. She just cleaned the rifle. She just prepared the ammunition. She just kept going into work every morning, standing one step behind the men who received the recognition, holding everything she was in a place where nobody thought to look for it. The ammo runner, doing her job, waiting without knowing she was waiting, for the moment when carrying everyone else's ammunition would not be enough. And the rifle would need to speak. 17 days. That was how much time separated the evening on the range. The one where Reeves watched Emily put 3 rounds inside 2 inches at 600 meters and said nothing more than your father knew exactly what he was doing from the morning that would redefine every single person on that team. 17 days during which Emily Parker went back to being runner, carried ammunition, maintained equipment, and kept everything she was in the same quiet place she'd always kept it. 17 days during which Chief Petty Officer Michael Reeves filed no report, changed no assignments, said nothing to the command structure about what he had seen on that range, which was either a failure of communication or an act of discretion, depending on how you looked at it, and which would become one of the most examined decisions of his career in the months that followed. 17 days during which the enemy was watching. This is the part that nobody on the team fully understood until the after-action analysis. The ambush in the valley wasn't opportunistic. It wasn't a patrol bumping into resistance by accident. It was intelligence-driven, patient, and designed specifically around the team's known composition and tactical posture. Someone had been watching their patterns. Someone had identified their sniper as the primary threat. Someone had built a plan around the singular objective of removing that threat first and then letting the rest of the Americans fight blind in a valley that had been chosen because the terrain eliminated every tactical advantage they would otherwise possess. The mission brief came on a Wednesday evening, 3 days before they were scheduled to go out. Emily wasn't in the briefing room. Logistics specialists don't attend mission briefs, and nobody suggested she should because nobody had a reason to think it mattered whether she was there or not. She found out she was going the same way she found out about most things from Rodriguez, who knocked on the armory door at 0700 Thursday morning and said, "You're on the convoy list for Saturday. Pack for 3 days. Don't ask me why, because I don't know why." Emily looked up from the inventory sheet she was working through. Who authorized that, she said. Rodriguez shrugged in the expressive way he had that conveyed entire paragraphs with a single movement of his shoulders. Came from Hayes, he said. That's all I've got. He disappeared before she could ask anything else. Emily set down the inventory sheet. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table thinking about the conversation in the mess hall. 7 months ago, Hayes's voice saying, "Don't drop it." The weight of those two words, the way they had settled somewhere beneath her ribs and stayed there. She went back to the inventory. She didn't ask Hayes about it until that evening, and even then it wasn't really a question. She found him outside the equipment bay in the last of the daylight, running through his gear with the systematic attention she had come to recognize as the team's universal pre-mission language. Every man doing his own version of the same prayer, laying hands on every piece of equipment as if to make an accounting with it before entrusting his life to it. Rodriguez said, "You put me on the list," Emily said. Hayes didn't look up from his pack. "I did." "Why?" "I was quiet for a beat, then because Reeves asked me to." Emily absorbed this. "He didn't ask me himself," she said. "No." Hayes agreed. "He wouldn't." Another silence. Hayes pulled a radio battery, checked the contacts, replaced it. "Reeves doesn't do things by halves," Hayes said. "He sees something, he follows it. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't make a production of it. He just quietly adjusts." He looked up at her then, and his face in the last of the light was serious in a way that was different from his usual serious, deeper, with something in it that Emily would later identify as the particular gravity of a man who already suspects what's coming without knowing the specifics. "He told me he wanted you where he could see you." "He can see me at the armory," Emily said. "Not the same thing," Hayes said. He went back to his gear. Emily stood there for another moment. "Hayes," she said. He looked up. "Is this going to be a simple mission?" she asked. Hayes held down his for a long time. "There's no such thing," when he said finally, which was not an answer but was also, she understood, the most honest thing he could give her. She left him to his gear. She went back to the armory and prepared the ammunition for the mission, with the careful, specific attention she gave to every round, inspecting each casing, checking the primer, seating, sorting by weight for consistency. She prepared Reeves's ammunition last. She held each round for a moment before setting it in the tray, the way her father had taught her, feeling for any imperfection that her eyes might miss. Her father had told her that the ammunition is the last thing you control. Everything after that, the wind, the distance, the moment, those belong to the world. But the round in the chamber is yours. You made that choice. You carry that. She made 42 rounds for Reeves that night. She did not yet know she would only need one. Saturday arrived the way bad days sometimes do, deceptively ordinary, flat-lit, and cool with nothing in the air to warn you. The convoy assembled at 0530. 2 vehicles, 9 personnel, 6 SEALs, 2 support specialists, including Emily and a combat interpreter named Samir, who had worked with the team for over 2 years and who Emily had exchanged more words with than almost anyone else on the base, largely because Samir treated conversation as a basic human courtesy rather than a competitive sport. "Runner," Samir said as she stowed her pack in the second vehicle, "you look like you didn't sleep." "I slept fine," Emily said. "You look like someone who slept fine but was thinking too much while doing it," Samir said, which was specific enough to be accurate. "I'm always thinking," Emily said. "Yes," Samir said. "That is the one thing everyone knows about you, even though they do not say it." He climbed in beside her. "It is also the one thing that most people here do not do enough of, so you are doing them a service." Emily almost smiled. Almost. Reeves was in the lead vehicle. He didn't look back at Emily when the convoy moved out. I didn't need to. She understood somehow that the fact of her being there was enough, not as a gesture of confidence, not as any kind of statement, but as the practical act of a man who trusted what he had seen and wanted it within reach. The drive into the mountains took 2 hours. For the first 90 minutes, it was what the brief had promised, routine surveillance traversing roads they'd used before moving toward an observation point that had yielded useful intelligence on 3 previous operations. Samir fell asleep against the window. Emily watched the terrain. She didn't have a rifle. She had her sidearm, her equipment pack, and the ammunition cases she was responsible for tracking and distributing. She was there as support. That was her function. That was what everyone believed she was there to do. At the 1 hour and 47-minute mark, the first vehicle's radio crackled with something that Emily couldn't quite hear over the engine noise. But the body language of the man in front of her changed in the particular way she had learned to read, a sharpening, a forward lean, and a hand going to a weapon without quite drawing it. Trouble coming, not arrived yet. Coming, she sat straighter. Samir woke up. What is it? He said. Don't know, Emily said. Radio traffic. Samir leaned forward and spoke to the driver in a quick, low exchange. The driver's response was 3 words. Samir turned to Emily. Command is reporting movement, he said. Along the ridge, multiple personnel. Enemy. Unconfirmed. The convoy slowed, and then the world came apart. The explosion was not the largest Emily had ever been near, but it was close enough and sudden enough that her body processed it before her mind did the concussive wave, the hard rocking of the vehicle, the sound that was not really a sound as much as a physical event that happened to include noise. The load vehicle 40 meters ahead was engulfed almost instantly. For approximately 2 seconds, Emily's mind was completely blank. Then her training hit all of it at once, and she was moving. Get down, she said to Samir, who was already moving, already speaking into the radio, his voice faster now than she'd ever heard it, but still controlled, still functioning the professional, underneath the man taking over the way it does when everything becomes simple and terrible at the same time. The gunfire came from 3 directions. Emily could hear this immediately and processed it with the part of her brain that her father had spent years developing, not the counting of shots, but the reading of them, the spatial awareness of where sound originates, the ability to construct a map from audio information. They were in a prepared kill zone. This was not an ambush of opportunity. This had been built for them. Secondary position, left ridge, she said aloud, more to herself than to anyone else. Primary fire, 12 o'clock. Third element, right ridge, suppressive. She looked at the door. We need to get out of this vehicle right now. The driver was already opening his door. What happened next took approximately 4 minutes and felt like 40. The 4 minutes contained the following 2 of the SEALs from the rear vehicle establishing cover positions behind the disabled vehicles. One SEAL taking fire and going down non-critically with a wound to the left arm. Samir providing real-time translation of what could be heard of the enemy's radio traffic. And Emily moving ammunition cases to the cover positions with the methodical efficiency that had defined her work for 11 months, while bullets struck the dirt around her in the particular pattern that means someone is adjusting their aim. She was not panicking. She understood this about herself with a clarity that would have been surprising if there had been any mental space available for surprise, which there wasn't. She was afraid the fear was there, specific and real and present, but it was not in control of her. Her father had explained this once in the garage on a quiet evening before any of this was imaginable. Fear is information, he'd said. It's telling you that something matters. The job is not to stop feeling it. The job is to use it. The enemy commander was the one she couldn't see. This was the problem, not the gunmen on the ridges who were following orders and firing according to a plan, but the source of the plan. Someone was directing this engagement from somewhere elevated and distant, adjusting the fire, reading the American response, filling in gaps. She could feel the intelligence of it, the patience, the way the pressure on the team kept shifting to prevent them from establishing any stable position. And then she heard Hayes's voice, 3 positions to her left, sharp and controlled. Reeves is down. Reeves is down. Emily stopped moving. The words hit her in layers, the tactical reality first, the human weight of it. Second and third underneath both of those, something she couldn't name yet, something that had been waiting in her hands for 11 months and was now very quietly beginning to stir. She crossed to Hayes's position on a route that used the destroyed vehicle as cover, running low, reaching him in 8 seconds. Reeves was on his side. He was conscious. His face was tight with pain and wet with blood from a cut above his eyebrow, but his eyes were focused and his breathing was controlled. The breathing of a man who is managing his own pain with active, deliberate attention. Where? Emily said. Leg, Reeves said. Right leg, below the knee. I can't. He stopped. Started again. I can't hold the position. The rifle was on the ground beside him. His hands were still reaching for it with the automatic instinct of someone whose body knows what the mind is still processing. Emily looked at the rifle. She looked at Reeves. She looked at the ridgeline. And in that moment, the gunfire around her, the men she had served with for 11 months in various degrees of danger. The rifle her hands knew better than any other object in her immediate world. Something that she had been carrying for 4 years without knowing how to carry it, finally found its proper shape. Where is the enemy commander? She said. Reeves heard the change in her voice. It was immediate the way he registered it, his pain-tight face shifting into something more alert, something that recalculated. "Parker, where is the Commander Reeves?" Hayes was 3 feet away. He was looking at her. His expression said something between stop and yes at the same time. "North Ridge," Reeves said. His voice had changed too, operating on information rather than resistance. "Elevated position, 300, maybe 350 meters above the valley floor. He's been using radio comms to direct the flanking elements every time we shift, he knows." He paused. "He's got a clear sight line on everything below him." "How far from our current position?" Emily asked. Reeves looked at her for one more second. 750, maybe 800. Emily picked up the rifle. Nobody said anything. Sergeant First Class Dominic Hayes, who had watched human beings operate under extraordinary pressure for 15 years of operational service, said afterward that the silence that followed Emily Parker picking up that rifle was the loudest silence he had ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of sound. There was plenty of sound, the ongoing gunfire, the radio Samir's voice in the background. It was the silence of every person in that position, understanding simultaneously that something was happening that had never happened before, and that whether they thought it was right or wrong or possible or impossible, it was happening now, and there was no structure available to stop it. "Parker," said Gunnery Sergeant Aaron Cole, the SEAL who had established the position to Emily's right, a man who had 17 years of service, and an expression on his face that Emily would later describe as the precise look of someone watching a house cat climb into a race car. What are you doing?" "My job," Emily said, which was either the truest thing she had ever said or the most complicated thing she had ever said, and she didn't have time to figure out which. She had to find the position. She moved to the best available point, not perfect, far from ideal but workable. The kind of workable that her father had always said was the actual definition of field conditions, because field conditions are never perfect, and the shooter who needs perfect will never shoot. She used the wreckage of the lead vehicle as a partial rest adjusted for the height. Differential read the wind off the movement of dust along the ridgeline. 3 distinct directions of movement, which told her the wind was shearing at altitude, coming off the peak and splitting, which meant she needed to account for lateral push between her position and the target. Her father's voice was not a memory in this moment. It was present, as if he were kneeling beside her in the dirt the way he used to kneel beside her on the range when she was 12, and learning to account for distance. One hand light on her shoulder, not guiding, just present his voice low and specific and absolutely calm. "Read the conditions first, always. Before you touch the rifle, you're already shooting. In your mind, you've already made every adjustment. The trigger pull is just confirmation of a decision you made before you got here." She read the conditions. She built a solution in her mind. Distance approximately 780 meters, based on the estimated position Reeves had described and the visual cues she could read from the terrain profile. Wind 8 to 11 knots at ground level, shearing at altitude to what she estimated as 14 knots with a left to right component at roughly 30 degrees off axis, elevation significant. The target position was above her, which meant the bullet's arc would behave differently than flat range conditions, and the shooter who doesn't account for this becomes the shooter who misses in exactly the way the formula predicts. Temperature mid-morning warming. The air was thinner than sea level, which affected velocity and therefore drop. She was doing mathematics that she couldn't have written down if you'd given her paper and pencil, but that lived in her hands and her eyes in the particular part of her brain. Her father had spent a childhood developing the part that took in physical information and produced solutions, the way other people solve arithmetic, not through labored calculation, but through a fluency born from 10,000 repetitions, until the process became something more like intuition and less like math. Hayes appeared at her shoulder. His voice was very low. "Parker, I need to know right now. Can you make this shot?" Emily settled the stock. She found the cheek weld, the specific geometry of her face against the rifle that she had developed across hundreds of hours of practice, and that was, she realized in that moment, perfectly fitted to this rifle. This specific rifle that she had maintained and handled and quietly, privately understood for 9 months. She found the scope. She began to look. "I'm going to find him first," she said. "Then I'll know." The scope was her father's world. Inside it, the chaos of the battlefield, organized itself into the clean grammar of distance and optics. The ridgeline was 900 meters of broken terrain and natural cover, and the enemy commander, whoever he was, whatever calculation had led him to believe he could trap a Navy SEAL team in a valley and Wynn had chosen his position well. He was elevated, sheltered with a sight line that gave him visibility over the entire engagement. He had not planned for the possibility that someone looking back at him would be able to reach him from where the Americans were pinned. He had not planned for Emily Parker. Cole was talking behind her, not to her, into the radio, his voice doing the controlled, urgent work of a man coordinating a response. Samir was translating intercepts. Hayes was above her, watching the ridgeline with binoculars, serving as a spotter without having been asked to, because he was Hayes. And this was what Hayes did. He saw what was needed, and he provided it. 3 o'clock off the rock formation, Hayes said. You see the rock that looks like it's been split down the middle, 60 meters left of that. Emily moved the scope. She found the split rock. She moved left. 60 meters in scope terms at this magnification, at this distance, was a very particular thing. Her eye traveled across it with the patience she had learned on quiet evenings in the garage, the patience that her father said was the thing most people thought was a talent, but was actually just the practice of learning to look without flinching, without rushing, without letting your need to find a thing cause you to see what isn't there. She found him. The enemy commander was a man of perhaps 40, though, at this distance, and in these conditions she was reading posture more than features. He was prone, which told her he was a shooter himself and understood exposure. He was elevated above his own men, which told her he was accustomed to directing rather than participating. He was using radio equipment, which told her Hayes's assessment was correct. He was the brain of this operation. And he was looking through his own optic at the American position below. He was looking at her. Not at her specifically. He didn't know she was there. He was looking at the position. But the coincidence of the sight lines, the fact that they were at this exact moment, both behind glass looking at each other across 780 meters of mountain air, struck Emily with the particular quality of clarity that she associated afterwards with the moments in life that had been approaching for a long time. I have him, she said. Hayes said nothing for half a second. Then, are you sure? Yes, another half second. Parker. His voice was different now. Every pretense stripped away, just the question and the man asking it. Can you make this shot? Emily breathed out, long, slow, down to the bottom of it. My father could make this shot at 1,000 meters in a 20-knot wind, she said. I'm not asking about your father. I know, she said. She breathed out again. Her heart rate had dropped. This was the thing she had never been able to explain to anyone, how the pressure, instead of accelerating her pulse, seemed to clarify it. Bring it to the slow measured beat that her father said was the body understanding what the moment required. He'd called it the quiet, the place you have to get to before the shot. Not calm exactly, something beyond calm. The place where thought and feeling and training all arrive at the same point. She was in the quiet. Make the radio traffic stop, she said. Hayes understood immediately. He reached for Cole and said 2 words. The radio went silent. The gunfire continued. The battle around her continued. She existed somewhere outside of it, in the particular isolation that her father had described to her once as the loneliest place in the world and the most necessary one. 780 meters, wind shearing left to right, elevation above, temperature rising. She built the hold. She found the point. She gave the trigger. The pressure that her father had spent years teaching her was not a pull, but a commitment, a decision you had already made, arriving at its physical expression. The rifle spoke. Emily felt the recoil the way she always felt it, absorbed. Managed the body, having practiced this moment enough times that it knew what to do without being told, the muzzle rising and returning her eye, finding the scope again before the shot had traveled half the distance to its target. 780 meters. At this distance, there is a measurable delay between the moment the trigger breaks and the moment the bullet arrives. It is a fraction of a second. It is also an entire universe. In that fraction of a second, Emily Parker existed in a state of absolute suspension, not waiting, not hoping, not praying, but simply present in the aftermath of a decision that had been made before she ever picked up the rifle, before she arrived at the phobie, before she applied to the military. before her father died. Before she understood what he had been giving her all those years in the garage on autumn evenings with the smell of solvent and gun oil and the sound of his voice saying, "The rifle is not about power, it is about responsibility." The fraction of a second ended. Through the scope, she saw the enemy commander's position change. The radio traffic that Samir had been translating, the steady, directing, orchestrating voice of the operations intelligence stopped completely. The engagement didn't end instantly. Battles don't end that way. The individual gunmen on the ridges continued for another several minutes, operating on momentum and training and the slow realization that the voice directing them had gone silent. But the shape of the attack changed immediately. The coordinated shifts, the responsive adjustments, the filling of gaps, all of it stopped. What remained was chaotic and decreasing the way a fire behaves after you remove the source of oxygen. The team responded to the change with the fluid professionalism of men who have trained for exactly this kind of pivot, pressing the advantage as the enemy fire became disorganized. Hayes directing movement, Cole establishing a flanking position, the team functioning with the compressed efficiency of people who have done this long enough that they can feel when the moment has turned. Emily remained at her position. She didn't take another shot. She didn't need to. Around her, the silence she had created was spreading outward from the ridgeline, washing across the valley, reaching the positions where her teammates were fighting, changing the arithmetic of the engagement in exactly the way that removing a commander always does. She was still behind the scope when Hayes appeared at her side. "It's turning," he said. His voice was stripped of everything except the essential. "They're breaking off." Emily stayed behind the scope for another moment. Then she lowered the rifle. She looked at her hands. They were not shaking. They were the same hands that had cleaned this rifle 200 times. The same hands that had carried ammunition cases and repaired damaged gear and sorted rounds by weight in the armory at the Phobie, while the men around her planned the missions they assumed she had no part in. The same hands her father had watched and taught and trusted before she understood what trust from someone like Thomas Parker actually meant. Cole was standing 5 feet away. He was staring at her with an expression that contained so many separate things: shock and recalibration, and something that might have been the beginning of shame, the particular shame that arrives when you realize you have been looking at something for a long time without seeing it, that his face looked almost unrecognizable. "Parker," he said, his voice broke slightly on the word, just slightly, just enough. Emily set the rifle down, carefully muzzle forward, the way her father had taught her to set it down. She looked at Cole. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The valley was growing quieter by the minute, and in the quiet, something that had been carried in secret for 11 months, for 4 years, for a lifetime, really, if you counted from the evening in the garage when a 9-year-old girl first looked at her father's rifle without fear, was beginning finally to be seen. Not celebrated, not announced, just seen for the first time, and it was enough. For now, it was enough. Reeves was still on the ground behind her. His leg immobilized, his face tight with pain, and something else, something she could feel without looking at him, the way you can feel when a person's understanding of a situation has fundamentally shifted beneath them, like ground that has changed its nature. Hayes was already on the radio calling for medical extraction. Samir was moving through the position, confirming personnel status, his voice low and efficient and carrying the particular steadiness of a man who has seen enough of both sides of war to understand that what just happened was remarkable and also simple and also the most human thing that had happened on this hillside all morning. The radio crackled. Command was asking for status. Hayes responded with 4 words: "We're bringing everyone home." Emily sat down in the dirt next to Reeves's rifle and waited for the extraction that would take them back to the base and the debrief and the questions and everything that came after. She wasn't thinking about any of that yet. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about the garage in autumn and the smell of solvent and the slow, patient voice explaining that a rifle was not about power, it was about responsibility, and that the ability was not what made you special. It was the responsibility you carried with it. She had been carrying it all along. She just hadn't known where it was going. Now she did. The extraction helicopter arrived at 14 minutes past noon. Emily knew the exact time because she had checked her watch when she heard the rotors, a habit her father had built into her, along with everything else. Know what time it is always, because time is the one resource that doesn't replenish and the one that matters most when everything goes wrong. It had been 51 minutes since the explosion destroyed the lead vehicle. 51 minutes since the world came apart. 51 minutes since Emily Parker picked up a rifle that wasn't hers and made a decision that would take the rest of her life to fully understand. The medical team came off the helicopter fast and professional, moving directly to Reeves, who had held himself together through the extraction with the particular grim endurance of a man who has trained his body to cooperate even when his body has reasons not to. He didn't make a sound when they moved him. He looked at Emily once from the stretcher as they lifted him along, direct look that she held without flinching, and then they had him in the helicopter, and the rotors were spinning up, and the first chapter of what happened in the valley was closing behind them. The ride back to the FOB took 23 minutes. Nobody spoke. This was different from the usual mission return quiet, which had the quality of relief and exhaustion settling into bodies that had been running on adrenaline. This quiet was different. It had texture. It pressed against the walls of the helicopter with a weight that Emily could feel on her skin. Cole sat across from her with his hands on his knees and his eyes somewhere between her face and the middle distance, working through something internal that she couldn't read entirely, but recognized the look of a man whose categories have been disturbed and who hasn't yet figured out how to reorganize them. Hayes sat beside her. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His presence next to her was its own statement, the physical language of a man who has made a decision about where he stands. Samir sat at the far end of the bench and looked at his hands. At one point, 12 minutes into the flight, he looked up at Emily and said very quietly, just audible under the rotors, "Your father would be proud." Emily looked at him. She didn't trust herself to answer that. She looked back at her hands and stayed that way for the remaining 11 minutes of the flight. The helicopter set down at 15 minutes past noon. By 15 minutes past noon and 30 seconds, the commanding officer of the base, Commander David Hargrove, was standing at the landing pad with an expression that Emily would later describe to Hayes as the look of a man who has just been told something that doesn't fit into any form he has available. Hargrove was 52 years old. He had 27 years of naval service. He was respected, effective, and organized, the kind of commander who processed information efficiently and did not typically allow his face to communicate what his mind was still working through. But standing there on the landing pad, watching Emily Parker step off that helicopter, still carrying Reeves's rifle because nobody had asked her to put it down, and she hadn't thought to his face, communicated quite clearly that he was in entirely new territory. "Sergeant Parker," he said. "Sir," Emily said. A pause of approximately 3 seconds, which doesn't sound like much, but is in the moment a very long time. "Is that Reeves's rifle?" Hargrove said. "Yes, sir." "Why do you have it?" "Because he couldn't," Emily said. Hargrove looked at Hayes. Hayes met his gaze with the calm of a man who has thought through exactly what he is and isn't going to say in the next 30 seconds, and has made his peace with it. "Sir," Hayes said, "I'd recommend we debrief before we do anything else." Hargrove looked at Emily one more time, then at the rifle, then at the dust on Emily's uniform and the steadiness of her hands, and the quality of her expression, which was not defiant and not apologetic and not performing anything at all, just present, which was in its own way the most unnerving thing she could have offered him. "My office," Hargrove said. 30 minutes. He walked away. Cole watched him go, then looked at Emily. His mouth opened and closed once. Then he turned and walked toward the barracks without saying anything. This was the most words Cole had failed to produce since Emily had known him, and she registered it for what it was. Not dismissal, but the retreat of a man who needs to think before he speaks, which is rarer and more valuable than most people recognize. Hayes watched all of this. "You ready for what comes next?" he asked. "No," Emily said. "Good," Hayes said. "If you were ready, I'd be worried." She handed him the rifle. He took it without comment and carried it toward the armory, which struck Emily as exactly right. The rifle going back to the place it lived, doing what rifles do when they are not being called upon to do other things, which is wait. She had 28 minutes before Hargrove's debrief. She used 12 of them to sit alone in the equipment room, not thinking or trying not to think, which is a form of thinking, doing the mental equivalent of what her body did after a long run, not recovering exactly but returning, coming back from the particular distance that extreme focus takes you to settling back into the coordinates of ordinary existence. She had killed a man. She had known when she made the shot what she was doing. She had known with the total clarity that her training produced what the bullet would do and what that would mean. She had made the decision in the space between one breath and the next, and she had made it with a complete, unambiguous understanding of its weight. This was what her father meant, not the ability, the responsibility. The ability was the easy part. You trained for the ability. You drilled it until it became reflex, until the mathematics of wind and distance lived in your hands instead of your head, until the mechanics of the rifle were as familiar as your own heartbeat. The ability was just practice made permanent. But the responsibility was something else entirely. It was the weight that came after. The specific, unshared weight that belonged to the person who made the decision, to nobody else, to you alone in the equipment room, sitting with your hands on your knees, understanding what you had done and why you had done it and what it cost and what it was worth. Emily had been afraid of this weight her whole life. She understood now that she had never actually avoided it. She had just been carrying it in the wrong direction. At 13 minutes into the 30 gunnery, Sergeant Aaron Cole knocked on the equipment room door. Emily looked up. Cole opened the door but didn't come in. He stood in the frame, this big, capable, experienced man who had looked at her earlier with an expression she was still processing, and he looked at the floor for a moment before he looked at her. "I owe you something," Cole said. His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard before. The operational briskness was gone. What was left was the man underneath, and the man underneath was struggling with something honest and not enjoying it. "You don't owe me anything," Emily said. "I called you runner for 11 months, Cole said. "I looked at what you did and I didn't look at who you were and He stopped, started again. "Martinez was asking me this morning before we left if you'd ever show what you had. I told him you were solid support, good hands, reliable." He looked at the wall. "I thought that was a compliment. I thought I was being fair." "You weren't being unfair," Emily said. "You were being accurate about what you could see." "That's what I'm saying." Cole's jaw tightened. "I should have been able to see more." A silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable. Uncomfortable isn't quite the right word, but honest, which is sometimes harder than uncomfortable. "You want to know what's strange," Emily said. "I spent 11 months trying not to be seen. I was good at it on purpose. And you're standing here apologizing for not seeing me anyway." Cole thought about this. "That doesn't let me off the hook," he said. "No," Emily agreed, "but it makes the hook smaller." Something in Cole's face shifted, not a smile, but the architectural element that a smile is made of, the softening around the eyes, the light easing of held tension. "How are you sitting there that calm?" he asked. "I'm not calm," Emily said. "I'm controlled. There's a difference." Cole nodded slowly, like a man filing something important. "Your father teach you that too," he said. "He taught me everything," Emily said. "I'm starting to understand how much." Cole nodded again. He straightened in the doorframe. "Hargrove's going to come at you hard," he said. "He's not a bad man, but he's going to ask questions that feel like accusations because he doesn't know how else to handle something that doesn't fit the form." "I know," Emily said. "Hayes will be in there with you." "I know that too." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth as much as it should be, I'm glad you were there. Every man on that team is going home tonight because you were there." He held her gaze. "That's not nothing." "No," Emily said quietly, "it's not nothing." He left. Emily sat for 3 more minutes. Then she stood up, straightened her uniform, and went to find out what happened next. Commander Hargrove's office was exactly what you would expect from a man who processed the world through systems and structure, precise, functional, nothing on the walls that wasn't operationally relevant, a desk that had the quality of a command post rather than a workplace. He was behind the desk when Emily entered. Hayes was already seated to the left. A JAG officer named Lieutenant Commander Patricia Welsh, whom Emily had seen twice in 11 months and never spoken to, was seated to the right with a legal pad and the careful, neutral expression of someone who was there to listen first and speak second. Hargrove let Emily said. He looked at her for a measured moment. Then he said, "Tell me what happened." Emily told him. She told it the way she told everything, directly, with the minimum necessary words and the maximum necessary accuracy, without embellishment and without apology. She described Reeves going down. She described the tactical situation, the coordinated fire from 3 positions, the evidence of intelligence-driven planning, the identification of a command element directing the engagement. She described picking up the rifle. She described finding the target. She described the shot. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Welsh was writing. Hayes was looking at the middle distance. Hargrove was looking at Emily. "You're a logistics specialist," Hargrove said. "Yes, sir." "With no designated marksman or sniper designation in your service record." "Correct, sir." "You used a weapon that wasn't yours in an active engagement without authorization from a superior officer." "She had authorization," Hayes said. Hargrove looked at him. Hayes met the look without shifting. "I gave the order," Hayes said. "In the field under fire with our designated sniper incapacitated and the engagement controlled by an enemy command element that was going to get us all killed if we didn't remove it." His voice was level, measured without defensiveness, just fact presented as fact. "Parker was the resource available to me that was capable of doing what needed to be done. I directed her to do it. The decision is mine." Hargrove was silent for a long moment. "You directed her," Hargrove said carefully, "because you knew she had this capability." "I discovered it over time," Hayes said. "I should have documented it. That's on me." Another silence. Hargrove turned to Emily. "Who else knew?" he said. "Reeves," Emily said. "Hayes, and now everyone who was in that valley." "Reeves knew." Hargrove absorbed this. "Our primary sniper knew that our logistics specialist had sniper-level capability and said nothing to me." "He said nothing to anyone," Emily confirmed, "including me until 3 days before the mission when he asked Hayes to put me on the convoy list." Hargrove was very still. "Why, Bush?" Hargrove said. "Why did he keep this to himself?" Emily looked at him directly. "I think," she said, "you'd have to ask him." Welsh looked up from her legal pad. For the first time, her careful, neutral expression broke slightly, not into emotion exactly, but into the look of someone who was finding the situation more interesting than she had anticipated. Hargrove sat back. This was the first unguarded movement Emily had seen him make. He was processing, she could see it, not just the tactical and legal dimensions of what had happened, which were his professional territory, but the human dimension of it, which was messier and didn't fit into any form he had available. "Parker," he said, and his voice had shifted. Not softer exactly, but different, less the commander questioning a subordinate, and more the man trying to understand a situation that is larger than his current framework for it. "Why are you a logistics specialist?" The question landed differently than anything else he had asked. Emily was quiet for a moment. "Because when my father died," she said, "I thought the only way to put down the grief was to put down the rifle, and I needed to serve, and I thought I could serve without it." She paused. "I was wrong, but I didn't know I was wrong until I was already here." Hargrove looked at her. "Thomas Parker," he said. Emily's expression changed just slightly. "You know the name," she said. "I trained under men who trained under Thomas Parker," Hargrove said. "If half of what they said about him is accurate, then I have been severely underutilizing his daughter for 11 months. He said this without inflection, which made it more devastating than if he had said it with feeling. Just the plain operational assessment of a man facing a failure of allocation. Welsh cleared her throat. "Commander," she said, "from a legal and administrative standpoint." "I know," Hargrove said, not unkindly. He looked at Emily. "There's a process. There will be a formal review. Hayes's account of the field authorization will be part of that record. What happened in that valley today is going to be looked at carefully, not because anyone is in trouble, but because it represents a gap in our personnel assessment and assignment processes that we need to understand and fix." Emily nodded. "One question," Hargrove said, "and I want the honest answer." "Yes, sir." "Today in that valley, with everything happening around you, and Reeves down, and 9 people's lives, depending on a shot at close to 800 meters, how certain were you when you took it? How certain were you that you could make that shot?" The room was absolutely still. Emily thought about her father's voice in the quiet before the trigger break. She thought about the wind reading and the elevation calculation, and the 780 meters of mountain air between her and a man who had been directing the killing of her teammates. She thought about the fraction of a second between the decision and its arrival. "Completely," she said. Hargrove held her gaze for a long time. Then he nodded once with a finality that closed the official portion of the conversation and opened something else. "Dismissed," he said. "Don't go far. This isn't over." It wasn't. Within 2 hours, the word had moved through the FOB with the compressed velocity that significant information always moves through a small, closed community. accelerating as it travels, acquiring weight and detail with each telling, reaching people ahead of any official notification, and arriving in most cases already in the form of something close to legend. Emily Parker shot the enemy commander. Emily Parker saved the team. Emily Parker, runner, the ammo girl, the logistics specialist. Everyone had been walking past for 11 months, had picked up Reeves's rifle and made a shot that their actual sniper lying on the ground with a wounded leg couldn't have made. Emily heard 3 different versions of this story before dinner, each one slightly more dramatic than the last, and she understood something her father had once told her about the way events become stories, that the story always grows toward the meaning the community needs to find in it, and that the meaning tends to be about them as much as about whoever the story is nominally about. She didn't try to correct any of the versions. She didn't say anything at all. She ate in the mess hall alone at a corner table the way she had eaten for 11 months, and she worked through her food with steady attention, and she felt the eyes on her, not aggressive, not hostile, but recalibrating the particular weight of people's attention when they are looking at something they thought they understood and discovering they didn't. It was Martinez who sat down first. Martinez was 24 years old, the youngest SEAL on the team, Puerto Rican from Miami with an energy that expressed itself in movement. He was rarely completely still. Some part of him, always recalibrating, foot tapping or hand turning or eye scanning, and an emotional directness that the older team members found either exhausting or refreshing, depending on the day. He sat down across from Emily without asking. He set his tray down. He looked at her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," Emily said. "I absolutely do." Martinez's voice was earnest in the particular way of young men who have not yet learned to perform their feelings at a safe remove. "I made jokes. Not mean ones. I never meant them mean, but I used to say things to Cole about you, like, and this is gonna sound terrible, I used to say you were like the team mascot. Like you were good luck, but not like a real operator." He stopped. His jaw was tight. "That was wrong. I was wrong." Emily set down her fork. She looked at him with the direct level gaze that people on the team were going to start recognizing in the coming days as specifically Emily Parker. Not hard, not cold, but honest in a way that didn't leave room for comfortable ambiguity. "Martinez," she said, "how old were you when you qualified for SEAL training?" He blinked. 20. "And when you got here?" 22. "And how many missions have you run since you arrived?" 14. "And how many of them," Emily said, "did you spend more time thinking about the people doing your supply and maintenance than about the mission itself?" A beat. "None," Martinez said. "Right," Emily said, "because that's not your job. Your job is the mission. My job is to make sure you can do your job. Those 2 things can both be true at the same time, and neither of them makes either of us the mascot." She picked up her fork again. "What happened today doesn't change what I do. It just adds to it." Martinez stared at her. "That's the most you've ever said to me," he said. "You've never given me a reason to say more," Emily said. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What was your father like?" The question caught her sideways, not in a painful way, but in the specific way that unexpected gentleness catches you when you have been braced for something harder. Emily was quiet for a long moment. "Patient," she said finally. "Precise. Funnier than anyone expected. He laughed at terrible jokes, including his own." She paused. "He understood things deeply, not just shooting everything. He thought about responsibility the way other people think about achievement, like it was the actual measure of a person." Martinez nodded slowly. "He sounds like someone I would have wanted to know," he said. Emily looked at her tray. "Most people did," she said quietly. "He made it easy." Martinez ate in silence for a moment. Then, without particular ceremony, he stood up, picked up his tray, and said, "For what it's worth, and I know you don't need it, you're not the mascot. You never were. I just didn't know how to see that until now." He left. Emily sat alone for a while longer. She was beginning to understand something she hadn't quite articulated before, that the process of being seen after a long period of deliberate invisibility was its own kind of discomfort. She had built the invisibility as protection and had come to rely on it in ways she hadn't fully examined. The invisibility said nobody can judge what they can't see. Nobody can measure you against a standard you haven't claimed. Nobody can watch you fail to be what your father was if they don't know you were ever supposed to be anything like him. But the invisibility also said nobody can find you when they need you. And 6 men had almost died in a valley because the one person with the ability to stop what was happening had spent 11 months not being found. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about it through dinner and through the debriefs that followed and through the long, quiet hours of that night when the FU was as close to still as it ever got. She thought about her father. She thought about the garage. She thought about patient evenings in the smell of solvent, in the specific quality of his silence that meant he was watching her work and approving of what he saw. She thought about what he had said the last time she saw him 2 days before the Wednesday in October that ended everything, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee going cold in front of him, looking at her with the expression she had spent years trying to fully read. He had said the thing about carrying something real is that it doesn't get lighter, you just get stronger. She hadn't known what he meant. She was beginning to understand. At 0200, Hayes knocked on her door. She was awake. She had been awake for 2 hours. "Come in," she said. Hayes opened the door. He had a folder in one hand and the look of a man who has been up since before Emily went to bed. "Hargrove filed his preliminary assessment," Hayes said. Emily sat up straighter, and Hayes was quiet for a moment. "He's recommending a formal review of your designation," Hayes said. "They're going to look at your service record, your training background, the shooting assessments from the range. They want to talk to anyone who can speak to your capability." He paused. "Reeves is going to give a statement from the hospital." Emily absorbed this. "What does a formal review mean?" she said. "It means," Hayes said carefully, "that the military is going to try to figure out what to do with someone they've been misidentifying for 11 months. He set the folder on the table beside the door. "It could mean a lot of things. Reassignment, new designation, additional training, though, between you and me, I don't think there's anyone on this base who would tell you what additional training you need." Emily looked at the folder. "Hayes," she said. "Yeah. What do you think is going to happen?" Hayes leaned against the doorframe. He was quiet for long enough that the silence became its own form of honesty. "I think," he said, "that what happened today is the kind of thing that is very difficult to put back in the box once it's out. I think people are going to look at you differently. I think the military is going to have to reckon with the fact that it had someone with your capability stamping inventory sheets for 11 months. He looked at her directly. "And I think your father, Thomas Parker, who trained some of the best precision operators this country ever put in the field, would find all of this both deeply satisfying and deeply infuriating at the same time." Emily almost laughed. It was the closest she had come to laughing all day, and the fact that it arrived now in the middle of the night in the company of the one person on the team who had seen her coming before anyone else did felt exactly right. "Yeah," she said, "he would." Hayes nodded. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He closed the door. Emily lay back in the dark and put her hands behind her head and stared at the ceiling and listened to the phobia settle into its overnight rhythms. The generators, the distant radio traffic, the particular ambient sound of a place that never fully sleeps. She thought about the shot, 780 meters. She thought about the fraction of a second between the decision and its arrival. She thought about what her father had told her about that fraction of a second, that it was the purest moment a shooter experiences, the moment after you have done everything you can do, and the world takes over, the moment that measures not your ability, but your trust in it. She had trusted it completely. And the weight of that, the responsibility of it, the full, uncompromised understanding of what she had done and what it had meant was something she knew she would carry for the rest of her life, not as a burden, as an accounting, as the record of a decision made in full knowledge of its cost for the right reasons at the right moment with the right preparation. Her father had said it once in the garage, in the particular way he said the things he most needed her to understand, not looking at her, looking at the rifle, his hands moving through the cleaning routine that she could now do in complete darkness. There are people who have the ability and never carry the responsibility. And there are people who carry the responsibility and never develop the ability. If you are fortunate and disciplined and honest with yourself, you get to carry both. She was beginning to understand what fortunate meant in that context. It didn't mean easy, it meant worthy. She closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly and not entirely the way it comes after days that have changed the shape of everything. But it came. The formal review board convened at 0800 the following Thursday, 6 days after the Valley. 6 days during which the FOB operated in two simultaneous realities. The official one where paperwork moved through channels and Emily's designation remained technically unchanged, and the unofficial one where everyone from the supply clerks to the senior operators had already reorganized their understanding of who Emily Parker was and what she represented, and where the word runner had quietly without announcement stopped being used. Nobody declared this. It simply stopped. The way certain things stop when the reason for them has been removed. Those 6 days were not quiet days for Emily. They were the kind of days that feel quiet on the surface because the noise is all internal, happening in the spaces between conversations and meals. And the routine work that continued, because routine work always continues regardless of what has changed underneath it. She maintained equipment. She processed inventory. She did her job with the same precision she had always brought to it because the bomb was still the job and the bomb still mattered. And there was something in the continuity of it that she needed the familiar weight of the work as ballast against everything that was shifting. But the conversations had changed. Men who had walked past her for 11 months were stopping, not to make grand statements, not to perform their recalibration for an audience. They stop the way people stop when they realize they've been standing in front of something real without seeing it, with the particular combination of recognition and embarrassment that produces a specific kind of sincerity, the kind that doesn't have time for performance. Petty Officer Second Class Danny Ortega stopped her in the equipment bay on Monday morning. Ortega was 28, 2 years her senior, a breacher by specialty and by personality. He moved through the world with an energy that knocked things loose, literal and figurative, and he had the kind of laugh that arrived without warning and filled rooms it had no right to fill. He had called her runner the way everyone called her runner, which was to say without malice and without thought, which is sometimes the same thing as dismissal. He stood in the equipment bay doorway with his hands in his pockets and said, "I've been thinking about what to say to you since Saturday." Emily looked up from the case she was packing. "You don't have to say anything." "I know," Ortega said. "That's kind of the problem, right? Nobody has to say anything. We just don't." And then 11 months goes by, and we don't know anything about the person who's been keeping our gear working and our ammo right and He stopped. "I used to think the important work was the thing you could see, the mission, the op, the thing you could tell a story about afterward." He paused. "I was only about half right." Emily regarded him steadily. "What changed your mind?" she said. "You did," Ortega said, "by doing both, by doing the invisible thing and the visible thing, and by making the invisible thing matter." He shifted his weight. "Does that make any sense?" "More than you think," Emily said. Ortega nodded. He started to leave, then turned back. "My mother is going to ask me what the bravest thing I've seen over here is," he said. "I used to have a different answer for that." He looked at her directly. "Now I've got a better one." He left. Emily stood in the empty equipment bay for a moment. Then she went back to work. The review board consisted of 4 people: Commander Hargrove, Lieutenant Commander Welsh, a Navy Special Warfare Command representative who had flown in from Coronado named Captain James Kellner, and a personnel evaluation specialist named Senior Chief Petty Officer Rosa Fuentes, who had the particular quality of a person who has spent 25 years watching the military fail to correctly assess human beings and has developed strong feelings about this. Emily entered the conference room at 0800 exactly. Hayes was in the hallway when she arrived. He was in his dress uniform, which she had never seen him in before, and it changed the geometry of him. Somehow the formality of it, emphasizing the seriousness in his face that was usually balanced by the informality of his manner. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like I'm being evaluated," Emily said. "You are," Hayes said, "but not the way you think. They're not trying to find out if you're guilty of something. They're trying to figure out how they missed something. Those are very different problems." "One of them is about me," Emily said. "Both of them are about you," Hayes said, "but only one of them puts the responsibility on you. The other one," he stopped. "The other one is theirs to carry." Emily looked at the door. "Reeves sent a statement," Hayes said. She turned back. "From the hospital," she said. "From the hospital," Hayes confirmed. "Wrote it himself, hand-delivered through the JAG office this morning. I haven't read it, but Welsh has, and her face when she came out of Hargrove's office told me it was significant." Emily absorbed this. Something moved through her, not quite emotion, but the precursor to it, The physical sensation of something that matters, arriving before your mind has finished processing why. Okay, she said. She went inside. Captain Kellner spoke first, which Emily had not expected. She had expected Hargrove to lead. But Kellner, who was 55 and had the specific kind of authority that comes from decades of quiet competence rather than rank display, opened a folder, looked at it for a moment, and then looked at her with an expression that was direct and without artifice. Specialist Parker, he said, I want to start by saying that I've read everything available on you, including your father's service file, your own assessment records, range reports from this base, and Chief Reeves's statement, which arrived this morning, in which I'll be transparent, significantly clarified several things I thought I understood. Emily said, yes, sir. Your father was Thomas Henry Parker, Kellner said. Sergeant First Class Army Special Forces, 22 years of service, 11, of which were spent as a precision marksmanship instructor for Special Forces qualification courses. He trained, by our count, somewhere between 400 and 600 operators over his career, a significant number of whom achieved the highest levels of long-range precision capability in the U.S. military. He paused. He started training you at age 9, Kellner said. Yes, sir. By 18, by your own account, and by the informal assessments conducted by your father and documented in his personal training records, which his estate archived, and which we have now reviewed, you had surpassed the benchmarks he used to evaluate his most advanced students. A beat. Yes, sir, Emily said. Fuentes leaned forward slightly. She had been watching Emily with the focused attention of someone conducting an evaluation at a level below the surface of the conversation, measuring things that don't appear in the transcript. Specialist Parker, Fuentes said, why did you enlist as a logistics specialist rather than pursuing a designation that would have utilized your precision shooting capability? Emily had been expecting this question. She had thought about it for 6 days. She had thought about it in different forms for 4 years. Because I conflated two things that should have been separate, Emily said. I thought that putting down the rifle meant I was honoring my father's death. I thought it meant I was choosing to be more than a weapon. She paused. What I actually did was deprive myself and my service of a capability that I had been given through 20 years of dedicated training because I didn't know how to carry the grief and the rifle at the same time. Another pause. I know now that they're not incompatible. I just needed longer to learn it. The room was very still. Hargrove looked at Welsh. Welsh was writing. Kellner looked at his folder, then back at Emily. Chief Reeves's statement, he said, makes a specific claim that I want to give you the opportunity to address. He opened the folder. He found the page. He writes, and I'm summarizing, that when he observed your capability at the range 6 weeks before the mission, he made an evaluation that you were operating at what he describes as a professional long-range precision level, which he defines as equivalent to or exceeding the standard required for a Navy Special Warfare designated marksman qualification. Emily said nothing. He also writes, Kellner continued, his voice careful, that he made the decision not to formally report this capability because, and I'm going to quote him directly here, Parker had made it clear to me in our one substantive conversation that the decision to set the rifle down was one she had made consciously and for reasons that were genuinely her own. I did not feel it was my place to unmake that decision by reporting it up the chain. I believed the right thing was to let her arrive at it herself, end quote. The room absorbed this. Emily absorbed it more slowly than the room. Because Reeves had seen, had evaluated, had understood, and had made the specific, deliberate, fundamentally respectful decision not to override her autonomy, not to report her capability up the chain without her consent, not to make decisions about who she was supposed to be without her participation. He had waited. He had put her on the convoy list. He had put her within reach and let the moment come. And the moment had come. Emily felt something crack open in her chest, not painfully, or not only painfully, but with the specific quality of something that has been held under pressure for a very long time, finally releasing, finding the space it needed, expanding into its actual shape. Captain Kellner, she said, and her voice was steady. She made it steady. She owed the room that much. Chief Reeves is the most operationally intelligent person I have encountered in my military career. What he describes in that statement is the right decision made for the right reasons. I would not have been ready any earlier. Kellner looked at her for a long time. And now, he said, Emily met his gaze without wavering. Now I'm ready, she said. The review board recessed at 10:40 and reconvened at 13:15. The 3 hours in between were the longest 3 hours Emily had spent at the phobie, and she spent them in the armory, doing the work that was still her work, that would be her work regardless of what the board decided, because the work was never about what she was designated. It was about what she could do. Rodriguez came in at 11:30 with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who has just learned something that has reorganized his recent past. He set a cup down next to her without speaking. She picked it up. Rodriguez, she said. Parker, he said. A pause. You knew about my father, she said. It wasn't a question. She had been thinking about it for 6 days, the conversation in the armory, the day he had watched her field strip a rifle and said, "You've done this 1,000 times." He had known. Not the full picture, but enough. Rodriguez wrapped both hands around his cup. I didn't know who your father was, he said. I knew you had good hands. I knew you handled a rifle the way people handle things that are part of them, not things they've just learned. He looked at his coffee. I asked you once, and you said you were paying attention. I remember, Emily said. I didn't push, Rodriguez said. No, Emily said. You didn't. Should I have, he said. His voice was honest, genuinely asking, with the particular gravity of a man reviewing a long period of behavior and not certain of what he finds. Emily thought about it. No, she said. You treated me like a professional who deserved to have her privacy respected. That was right. Rodriguez nodded slowly. The only person who pushed, Emily said, was Hayes. Hayes pushes everything, Rodriguez said. He's constitutionally incapable of leaving something unexamined. He's also almost always right, Emily said. Rodriguez smiled for the first time. It was a small smile worn around the edges, the smile of a man who has been working too long in places that are hard on smiles. Don't tell him that, Rodriguez said. He'll never let any of us forget it. Emily almost laughed. Almost. Rodriguez drank his coffee. What happens now, he said. Board reconvenes at 13:15, Emily said. You know what they're going to say? Emily looked at the inventory sheet she hadn't been really looking at. I think so, she said. And Rodriguez said. Emily set down the inventory sheet. And I think my father would find the whole thing completely insane, she said, in the specific way where he shakes his head and laughs and then goes back to the workbench and starts cleaning something to calm down. Rodriguez looked at her for a moment. He sounds like a good man, Rodriguez said. He was the best man I knew, Emily said simply. And I've spent 4 years trying to figure out how to be worthy of what he gave me. Rodriguez nodded. He finished his coffee. He stood. For what it's worth, he said, standing in the armory door, the way Cole had stood in the equipment room door 3 days ago, the way people kept standing in doorways around Emily now, as if the threshold itself was meaningful. You're the best thing that's happened to this armory since I've been here. Whatever they decide in there, don't lose that part. He left. Emily sat alone in the armory until 12:50, when she stood, straightened her uniform, and walked back to the conference room. The board reconvened at 13:15 exactly. Captain Kellner spoke again. Specialist Parker, he said, the board has reached a preliminary determination, subject to formal confirmation, through Naval Special Warfare Command, that your current designation does not accurately reflect your capability or your value to operational units functioning in the field. He looked at her steadily. We are recommending that you be formally assessed for the Navy Special Warfare Designated Marksman Program with expedited processing, given the operational evidence of capability documented during the engagement of, he checked the date 4 days ago. Emily said nothing. Additionally, Kellner said, we are initiating a broader review of the personnel assessment process at this and other FOBs, specifically looking at how support-designated personnel with specialized backgrounds are identified and utilized. He paused. Your case is not unique, Specialist Parker. You are unfortunately not the first person this has happened to, but you may be the most visible demonstration of what the gap costs. Fuentes spoke for the second time in the entire proceeding. Specialist Parker, she said, I've been doing personnel evaluation for 25 years. I've seen a lot of people come through a lot of processes. She paused. In my experience, the people who carry things quietly for a long time, who do the work without the recognition, who maintain other people's weapons, who prepare other people for missions, those people tend to have the strongest foundations. because they know what the foundation is actually for. Her voice was measured, professional, but underneath it was something warmer. You have an extraordinary foundation. This process is going to give you the structure that should have been around it from the beginning. Emily looked at her. Thank you, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. Hargrove closed the folder in front of him. One more thing, and he said, and I want the record to reflect that this is my statement as commanding officer, not a component of the board's formal determination. He looked at Emily directly. I failed you, and he said. The room was absolutely still, not intentionally and not out of malice or prejudice. But the result is the same 11 months during which you were underutilized, underrecognized, and placed in a position that did not match your capability. That happened on my watch. The men on this base are alive today in part because of what you were trained to do and who you were trained to be. That is a fact that I intend to carry. He paused. As I should. Emily looked at him. She thought about the weight her father had described, the responsibility of the person who holds the decision, the accounting that follows. Sir, she said carefully, with respect, you can only assess what's been told to you. I chose not to tell anyone. Reeves chose not to report it. The gap is shared. Hargrove held her gaze. That's generous, he said. It's accurate, Emily said. A pause. Dismissed, Hargrove said, with the board's thanks and the unit's gratitude. Emily came to attention and left the room. Hayes was waiting in the hallway. She didn't have to say anything. He read her face with the speed of someone who has been reading faces in high-stakes environments for 15 years and knew exactly what each combination of elements meant. Good, he said. Good, she said. He nodded. They walked together down the hallway toward the exterior door, and the afternoon light hit them both as they pushed through it, and Hayes stopped on the step and looked out at the base with the expression of a man who has been carrying a concern for a long time and has just been allowed to set it down. I need to tell you something, he said. Emily stopped beside him. I knew the first time I really watched you work, Hayes said. In the mess hall when I told you not to drop it, I knew I was talking about more than grief. I knew you were carrying something specific, something trained and real, and I didn't report it either. He looked at her. I should have. I should have found a way to make it official that protected your choice and served the mission at the same time. I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't try hard enough to figure it out. Emily looked at him. This was Hayes, honest, direct, carrying his own accounting. Hayes, she said. Yeah. You told me not to drop it, she said. That was enough. That was exactly enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your father would have liked this team, the best parts of it. He would have had opinions about the rest, Emily said. Hayes laughed a real laugh, short and genuine. No doubt, he said. They stood in the afternoon light for another moment. Then Hayes said, you know what happens next, right? The assessment, the training pipeline, the designation review. It's going to be a process. I know, Emily said. People are going to watch you, Hayes said. More than before, there's going to be attention. People who want to make you a story. People who want to use you as an example of something good or bad, depending on their agenda. I know, Emily said again. How are you going to handle that? Emily thought about it. The same way I handle everything, she said. I'm going to do the work. The rest is noise. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Your father didn't just teach you to shoot, he said. He taught you how to think. He taught me they were the same thing, Emily said. Hayes nodded. He was right, Hayes said. He went back inside. Emily stood alone on the step for a moment longer. She thought about Reeves in the hospital, the hand-delivered statement, the specific, respectful intelligence of the decision he had made, the way he had seen her and waited and trusted the moment. She thought about Cole in this doorway of the equipment room, carrying his own accounting. She thought about Martinez and Ortega and Rodriguez and Samir, each one in their own way, working through the reorganization of something they had believed to be settled. She thought about Hargrove saying, I failed you, and meaning it, and putting it on the record. She thought about Fuentes and the 25 years of watching the military get people wrong. She thought about all of it, the whole complicated, painful human machinery of a community, reckoning with a failure of vision, and she felt underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the still processing weight of what she had done in the valley, something she hadn't expected to feel. Gratitude, not for the failure, not for the 11 months of invisibility, but for the fact that when the moment came, she had been ready. Her father had made her ready, and the readiness had held. That evening at 1840, Emily went to the range. She signed in with the range officer, a quiet sergeant named Tillman, who had seen her there before, and who now looked at her with the careful, slightly awed expression that had become she was starting to understand her new normal. She set up at the longest available position. She prepared the rifle, not Reeves's rifle, her own now, a match-grade system that Rodriguez had pulled from inventory that morning, with the specific, deliberate care of a man making a statement, without words, setting it on the armory counter, and saying only Hargrove authorized a new assignment for you. She took her time. She read the conditions. She thought about her father. She thought about the garage. She thought about the evenings that had made her. And then she shot, not for proof, not for anyone watching, not to demonstrate anything to any board, or any officer or any teammate who was still working through their recalibration. She shot because it was who she was, because it had always been who she was, because the part of herself she had tried to put down was the part her father had spent his life giving her. And you do not put down the best things someone loved gave you. You carry it. You carry it forward. You carry it all the way, round after round, in the settling afternoon light, the rifle doing exactly what it was built to do, and she doing exactly what she was built to do. The gap between them closing to nothing, to the specific unity of a person and a skill that have been together long enough that neither exists fully without the other. She shot until it was too dark to shoot. She cleaned the rifle. She walked back across the base in the dark. She passed the armor, her armory still lit. Rodriguez visible through the window, working late the way he always worked late. She passed the mess hall where she could hear the voices of the team. Cole's among them, the specific register of men who have been through something together and are in the particular way of soldiers processing it, by not processing it, talking about other things, eating, making bad jokes, doing the human work of returning to ordinary life after extraordinary experience. She stopped at the door. Through the window, she could see Martinez at one of the corner tables laughing at something Cole had said, his whole body involved in the laugh, the way his whole body was always involved in everything. She could see Hayes at the far end reading something, his coffee untouched beside him, the way his coffee was always untouched. She could see the empty chair at the table nearest the door, the corner table where she had eaten alone for 11 months, the table that had its own kind of meaning now, a before and after encoded in its geography. She looked at it for a moment, then she pushed open the door. Hayes looked up first. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and something in his look said, "There you are." Martinez looked up next, and his face did the thing faces do when they are genuinely glad to see someone, the uncomplicated brightness of it. "Parker," he said, "you eat yet?" "No," Emily said. "Then sit down," Martinez said, as if this were the simplest thing in the world, as if it had always been this simple, as if the only thing that had ever needed to change was the moment when someone said it. Emily sat down, not at the corner table, at the table with the team. And the conversation moved on around her, Cole making another joke. Ortega laughing, that laugh that filled rooms. It had no right to fill. Hayes turning a page in whatever he was reading, and she sat in it, this ordinary human thing, this room full of people who had looked at her wrong for 11 months and were working imperfectly and honestly toward looking at her right. She sat in it. She ate. She was still carrying everything. She had just finally learned where to set it down. Chief Petty Officer Michael Reeves came back to the FOB on a Tuesday, 19 days after 14 days after the review board, 8 days after Emily had sat down at the team's table in the mess hall, and the conversation had moved on around her like water, finding its natural level, as if she had always been there, which in every way that actually mattered, she had. She knew he was coming because Hayes told her at 0600, standing in the armory doorway with his coffee still untouched. Always untouched, saying only, "Reeves is cleared for return," lands at 1400, and then leaving before she could respond because Hayes understood that some information needs space around it to be properly received. Emily spent the hours between 6 and 14 doing what she always did when something large was approaching. She worked. She processed the week's inventory. She ran assessments on 3 rifles that had come back from training exercises with reported issues. She found all 3 issues within the first 10 minutes of examination, which Rodriguez observed from across the room, with the look of a man who has been watching something remarkable happen in his immediate vicinity for 11 months and is only now giving himself permission to call it what it is. At 1350, she set down the last rifle, cleaned her hands, and went to the landing pad. She was the only one there from the team when the transport came in. She hadn't planned it that way. She hadn't told anyone she was going, hadn't coordinated or announced. She had simply gone the way you go toward things that matter without needing to explain why. Reeves came off the transport on crutches, which made him look unfamiliar in a way that the injury itself didn't fully account for. It was the dependency of the crutches, the way they reorganized his weight and movement, that struck Emily as wrong, not because of vanity, but because every operational instinct she'd developed said that Reeves existed in a state of self-sufficiency so complete it was almost physical law. He saw her immediately. He stopped. They looked at each other across the 20 feet of tarmac between them, and the look had everything in it: the valley, the shot, the statement he had written and delivered to the JAG office by hand, the 9 months of rifle maintenance and quiet parallel understanding, the Thursday evening on the range when he had watched her shoot and said, "Your father knew exactly what he was doing." He crossed the 20 feet slowly. The crutches made it slower than either of them wanted. When he reached her, he stopped again. He was close enough now that she could see the particular quality of his eyes, focused and direct, and carrying something that he was in the way of men like Reeves working to say accurately rather than impressively. "Parker," he said. "Reeves," she said. A pause. "I read the board's preliminary determination," he said. "I know," she said. "Hargrove copied you." He did. Reeves shifted his weight on the crutches with the careful management of someone still learning a new physical grammar. "How do you feel about it?" Emily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Like the right thing is happening at the wrong pace," she said. "And like I wasted time I didn't need to waste. And like none of that matters as much as what comes next." Reeves looked at her. "That's 3 answers," he said. "You asked one question," Emily said. "It had 3 parts." Something moved across Reeves's face that was as close to a smile as she had ever seen from him, which meant it was barely a smile at all, but was in the currency of Michael Reeves enormously significant. "I want to talk to you," he said. "Not now, when I'm settled. Tonight, if that works." "It works," Emily said. He nodded. He started toward the main building on his crutches. He stopped after 3 steps and turned back. "Parker," he said. "Yeah." "You saved my life," he said, not dramatically, not with the weight of a pronouncement. Just a fact stated in the flat, accurate way he stated facts. "I know that's not why you did it. I know you did it because it needed doing, and you were the one who could do it. But the fact is the same regardless of the reason." Emily held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I needed you to know that I know," Reeves said. He turned back toward the building. Emily watched him go. She stood on the landing pad alone for another moment after he disappeared through the door. The afternoon pushing against her face with that particular quality of Afghan mountain air, thin and dry and somehow clarifying, as if the altitude stripped away anything that wasn't essential. She thought about what it meant, what it actually meant beneath the professional surface of it, that Michael Reeves had waited, that he had seen her capability and made the decision to respect her agency over it, that he had understood something about her that she hadn't fully understood about herself, which was that the right moment was not something that could be forced or reported or officially designated into existence. It had to arrive, and it had. At 1900, they sat across from each other in the small conference room adjacent to the operations center, the one that was used for sensitive conversations and was empty most evenings. Reeves had his leg elevated on a second chair. Emily had 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up. "I want to explain the statement," he said. "You don't owe me an explanation," Emily said. "I know I don't." He wrapped both hands around the cup the same way Rodriguez had done, which struck her as the kind of convergence that means something without necessarily meaning anything specific. "I want to give you one anyway, because the decision I made not to report what I'd seen had consequences that I couldn't fully predict, and you deserve to know how I arrived at it." Emily sat back. "Okay," she said. Reeves looked at the table for a moment. "When you told me about your father," he said, "about why you'd put the rifle down, I understood it. Not in an abstract way. I understood it specifically. He paused. I lost my mother when I was 24. She was the reason I joined. She was the person who made me believe that what I could do was worth doing in service of something larger. He stopped. When she died, I had 6 weeks where I didn't trust myself with this job. Not because I'd lost skill, because the reason for the skill felt like it had been removed. He looked up at Emily. I came back to it, obviously, but I came back to it on my own timeline in my own way because someone I trusted didn't force the issue. They just left the door open. Emily was very still. So when I saw what you had, Reeves said, and I understood why it was in storage, I decided to leave the door open. I put you on the convoy list because I wanted you close. Not because I was predicting the valley. I wasn't. I just wanted you where the work was real because that's how doors open in my experience. Through proximity to the real thing. A silence stretched between them. The statement you gave the board, Emily said finally. You said you didn't think it was your place to unmake my decision. It wasn't, Reeves said. But you were also managing a risk, Emily said, to the team. If we'd gone into that valley and things had gone the way they did, and I hadn't been there. Yes, Reeves said. He didn't flinch from it. I was managing a risk. I made a judgment call about which risk was larger, forcing your hand before you were ready or waiting and accepting the possibility that the moment might not come or might come too late. He looked at her steadily. I would make the same call again. Emily sat with us. Even knowing how close it was, she said. Especially knowing how close it was, Reeves said. Because the shot you made in that valley was not just a function of skill. It was a function of being ready. If I had forced the issue 3 months ago, if I had reported your capability and you had been reassigned and put through a formal pipeline, before you arrived at it yourself, I don't know if the shot would have been the same. I genuinely don't know. Emily thought about the quiet, the place she had found behind the scope in the valley. The specific, unrepeatable quality of being in the right moment with the right preparation and the right reason. You might be right, she said. I might be, Reeves said. Or I might have gotten lucky and gotten everyone killed in the process. That's the weight I'm carrying. He said it without self-pity, just statement, just the accounting of a man who understands responsibility the way Thomas Parker had taught his daughter to understand it. That's the decision I made and what it cost, and I own it. Emily looked at him for a long moment. My father would have liked you, she said. Reeves was quiet. Tell me about him, he said. Nobody had ever asked her that, not in those words, not with that directness, not with the specific quality of genuine curiosity, rather than polite conversation filling. Tell me about him, as if Thomas Parker was someone worth knowing, about someone whose story had value beyond being the explanation for Emily's capability. She talked for 40 minutes. She told Reeves about the garage and the workbench and the autumn evenings. She told him about the terrible jokes and the patient instruction and the way her father could explain physics through feeling, could make a 12-year-old understand wind deflection not through mathematics, but through the experience of being in it. She told him about the training benchmarks and the day she exceeded them, and the expression on her father's face that she had spent years trying to read. She told him about the Wednesday in October and the 2 weeks of leave and the return to work and the decision to enlist as something other than what she was. She told him about the grief. Not all of it. Some grief doesn't have words yet, or has words that aren't ready to be spoken aloud to people you're still learning to trust. But enough of it, enough that the shape of it was visible in the room, the specific shape of a loss that had reorganized everything, and that she had been carrying not as weight, but as a kind of compass pointing her towards something she hadn't named yet. Reeves listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer perspective or parallel experience or wisdom. He listened with the focused, receptive attention of a man who understands that some things need to be heard more than they need to be responded to. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. He sounds like a man who understood what he was building, Reeves said finally. I think he did, Emily said. I think he understood it better than I did for a long time. Most teachers do, Reeves said. They see the whole structure before the student can. That's what makes the good ones good, he paused. The best ones don't tell you what they've built. They let you find it yourself. Emily looked at this table. He told me once, she said, that the ability isn't what makes you special. It's the responsibility you carry with it. Reeves was quiet for a moment. He was right, he said simply. They finished their coffee. At 2100, as Emily stood to leave, Reeves said her name once more. Parker. She turned. The assessment pipeline, he said, the designated marksman qualification process. It's going to move faster than normal because of the operational documentation. You'll probably have a date within the month. Hayes told me, Emily said. I'm going to request assignment as your primary evaluator, Reeves said, when my leg clears, which will be approximately 6 weeks. Emily looked at him. Why, she said. Reeves met her gaze. Because I know what you can do, he said, and I know where it came from. And the evaluation process deserves someone in it who understands both of those things. A pause. Also, he said, and the near smile appeared again, slightly more visible this time. Your father trained me to hold a rifle when I was 26. I spent 3 weeks at his program at Fort Bragg. He was the best instructor I ever had. The room stopped. Emily stared at him. You never told me that, she said. No, Reeves said. You knew who he was, Emily said. From the beginning. When I first told you his name, you already knew. I already knew, Reeves confirmed. He held her gaze without flinching. I recognized your hands the first time you handled my rifle. The specific way you moved through the inspection. It's a signature the way he taught it. Unmistakable if you know what you're looking for. He paused. I wasn't certain, but I thought I recognized it. And the range, Emily said. When I shot in front of you, you already knew. I confirmed it, Reeves said. The style, the fundamentals, the way you read conditions before you touch the rifle, all of it. Thomas Parker. He looked at her steadily. He was genuinely one of the best I ever encountered. I owe a significant portion of my career to 3 weeks of his instruction. The fact that his daughter was maintaining my rifle. He stopped. I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know if you knew I'd trained under him. I didn't know if it would help or hurt to tell you, so I waited. Emily sat back down. Her hands were flat on the table. She was thinking about all of it, 9 months of Reeves bringing her his rifle, 9 months of her maintaining it with hands that carried her father's teaching, 9 months of the two of them occupying parallel knowledge without speaking, yet both of them carrying the same man's influence in completely different forms. He never mentioned students by name, Emily said quietly. Privacy. He said the instruction belonged to the student, not to him. That sounds exactly like him, Reeves said. Emily looked up. Did he know, she said. Do you think he knew that the student he trained at Fort Bragg would one day— No, Reeves said. Nobody knows things like that. He paused. But your father was the kind of man who planted things carefully, who understood that what he built would outlast the building. I don't think he knew the specifics, but I think he understood the principle. Emily was quiet for a very long time. The room held the weight of it, the specific, staggering weight of the world's insistence on connecting things that seem separate, of the way a man's life radiates outward through every person he shapes, of Thomas Parker's hands, moving through a generation of shooters, his voice living in their technique, his lessons encoded in their reflexes, arriving decades later in a valley in Afghanistan through a woman who had tried to put it down and found it was already everywhere. He built more than he knew, Emily said finally. The best ones always do, Reeves said. The formal assessment notification arrived on a Thursday morning, which Emily noticed with the particular awareness of someone who has begun to track the way certain days recur with significance. Thursdays kept arriving with things that mattered, as if the week had developed an opinion. The notification was delivered by Fuentes herself, who had apparently requested the assignment of bringing it in person, which was not standard procedure, and which communicated in the specific language of bureaucratic deviation that she considered this case worth the personal investment. Fuentes handed Emily the folder. Emily opened it. The date of the assessment was 6 weeks out. The location was Naval Special Warfare Command at Coronado. The evaluating officer listed was, and Emily felt the particular quality of a circle completing Chief Petty Officer Michael Reeves pending medical clearance. At the bottom of the notification in a section labeled Additional Notes Someone, and the handwriting told her it was Kellner had written a single line. Your father's file will be reviewed as part of your qualification documentation. It will speak for itself, so will you. Emily closed the folder. Fuentes was watching her. 25 years, Fuentes said, and I don't think I've ever delivered a notification that felt this overdue. 11 months overdue, Emily said. Longer than that, Fuentes said. 4 years by my count, maybe more. She paused. The system failed you. I want you to know that I know that. The people in this process know that. And we intend to do better, not just for you, but because of you. Emily looked at her. Do you know what my father used to say about systems? Emily said. Tell me, Fuentes said. He said systems don't fail people. People inside systems make choices that fail people. And the fix isn't a better system. It's better choices. She held the folder against her chest. He said that when you find a failure in the system, you look for the human decision underneath it, and you fix the decision and the system corrects itself. Fuentes was quiet for a moment. I was right, she said, and I intend to quote that in my formal recommendation for the personnel assessment protocol revision, if you don't object. Quote it, Emily said. He'd want it used. Fuentes left. Emily stood alone in the armory with the folder in her hands and the quiet morning around her, and the familiar smell of solvent and metal, and the particular quality of a room that has been the site of important things and holds a trace of them in its air. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to what her father had been building toward without knowing he was building toward it. 6 weeks to the assessment that would formalize what a valley in Afghanistan had already confirmed. 6 weeks to the designation that should have been hers years ago and would be hers now because the moment had finally arrived, as moments do when you have done enough preparation and the world decides it's time. She set the folder down carefully. She picked up the rifle that was waiting for her. Her rifle now. Rodriguez's deliberate and wordless gift, and she began the morning inspection with hands that were steady and certain, and her father's and her own. Cole found her there an hour later. He leaned against the door frame. They all kept finding her in doorways, the whole team, as if the threshold itself was where honesty lived. And he looked at her with the expression that had replaced the old one, the one that had seen her position instead of her potential. Heard about the notification, he said. Word travels fast, Emily said. It's a small base, Cole said. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about something you said in the equipment room, about how I was being accurate about what I could see. I remember, Emily said. I've been thinking about that distinction, Cole said, between what you can see and what's actually there. He shifted his weight. In my job, I'm trained to close that gap as fast as possible. It's literally survival to close that gap. And for 11 months, I still missed it. He looked at her directly. How do you get better at seeing what's actually there instead of what you expect to see? Emily considered this. You assume you're missing something, she said. Not as a performance of humility, as an operational baseline. You assume that your current picture of a person is incomplete, and you stay curious about the rest of it. She paused. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing a shooter can do is decide he already knows where the target is before he looks. The same is true of people. Cole stared at her. How long have you been this good at this, he said. My whole life, Emily said. Nobody asked. Cole took that in. I'm asking now, he said. Emily looked at him, this big, capable, honest man who had called her runner for 11 months and was now standing in her doorway trying to become better than he had been, which is the most important thing any person can do. I know, she said. That's enough. The day before Emily left for Coronado, the team gathered in the mess hall at Hayes' direction, which was communicated through the particular channel of Hayes telling Rodriguez, who told Martinez, who told everyone else, which was how things moved through the team when Hayes wanted them to move without appearing to move them. She walked in to find them, already there, all of them, including Samir, including Rodriguez, including the 2 new support specialists who had arrived the previous week, and who had the particular expression of people who know they have walked into the middle of something significant without having the context for why. Hayes was standing at the end of the table. I didn't make a speech. Hayes never made speeches. He held up his coffee cup, still untouched, still always untouched, and said, We're sending off the best logistics specialist this unit has ever had, who turns out to have also been the best shot any of us will probably ever see in our careers, who did her job without recognition for 11 months and did the other job when it mattered most. He looked at Emily directly. Your father built something extraordinary. You carried it here. This team is alive because of both of those things. Emily looked around the table. Martinez with his whole body enthusiasm and his genuine heart. Ortega with the laugh that filled rooms. Cole working every day to see more clearly. Rodriguez with his sunflower seeds in his good hands and his coffee at 11:30 that had been its own kind of statement. Samir, who had said your father would be proud 18 days ago in a helicopter, and had been exactly right. Hayes, who had told her not to drop it and had meant more than either of them understood at the time. She looked at all of them. She thought about her father. She thought about the garage, the autumn evenings, the workbench, the patient voice explaining that a rifle was not about power, it was about responsibility. She thought about carrying, about what it meant to carry something real, something given to you by someone who loved you, something that doesn't get lighter, but that you get stronger then. She thought about the valley, the shot, the fraction of a second, the enemy commander's position changing through the scope, and the absolute stillness afterward that had been the quietest and most complete moment of her life. She thought about sitting down at this table 8 days ago, and the conversation moving around her like water finding its level, and knowing finally that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She stood up. My father told me once, she said, that the best shooters he ever trained had one thing in common: not natural ability, not superior physical condition, not even intelligence, though they were all intelligent. She paused. They all understood why the shot mattered before they took it, not the tactical reason, the human one. She looked around the table. I understood why this shot mattered. You were the reason. All of you. Every one of you who I spent 11 months walking behind and preparing and keeping ready, you were the reason. And I want you to know that I would make that shot again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day it needed to be made, because that is what responsibility looks like when it has finished becoming something. She looked at Hayes last. Don't drop it. Hayes raised his untouched coffee. Everyone raised whatever they had. Emily raised hers. The room was full of people who had looked wrong for 11 months and were learning to look right. And that was enough. That was exactly enough, because learning to look right is not a failure that needs to be punished, but a human capacity that needs to be developed. And Emily Parker had learned, was still learning, that carrying people forward is not less than being the one in front. It is everything. It has always been everything. She left for Coronado the next morning at 0500. She carried one bag, one rifle, and 42 years of her father's teaching encoded in her hands. She was not the ammo runner anymore. She was not the invisible woman one step behind. She was Emily Parker, daughter of Thomas Parker, trained from childhood to carry the weight of the ability and the responsibility together. And she had finally, after 11 months of silence and 4 years of grief and a lifetime of preparation, arrived at the only moment that had ever actually been waiting for her. She walked toward it without hesitation, without apology, without looking back. She walked toward it the way her father had taught her to approach everything that mattered, with steady hands, clear eyes, and the absolute unshakable knowledge of why it needed to be done. That was the lesson. That had always been the lesson. And Emily Parker finally, fully, completely carried it home.